Welcome, everybody. Happy New Year. Hope everybody had a nice holiday and break if you got one. So, welcome to the first Manuscript Monday of 2026. I want to talk a little bit about the Manuscript Society first. The Manuscript Society was founded as the National Society of Autograph Collectors in 1948. It includes collectors, but also manuscript curators, librarians, dealers, auction houses. It began with members of just basically in the United States and Canada, but now has members from around the world: Asia, Australia, Europe, and South America. The mission of the Manuscript Society is to encourage the collection and preservation of manuscripts and documents, to stimulate and aid collectors in their various collecting specialties, and to facilitate the exchange of information and knowledge among collectors, scholars, dealers, and the general public. In addition to the Manuscript Mondays, the Manuscript Society publishes a quarterly journal, Manuscripts, and a quarterly newsletter, the Manuscript Society News. The Society also has a scholarship program. The Richard Moss Research Grant is currently closed right now, but will be available, I think, in the next month or so. So please visit the Manuscript Society website for more information. And finally, the Manuscript Society holds an annual meeting, which offering members a fun-filled get-together and behind-the-scenes visits to memorable manuscript repositories and museums, both the United States and abroad. And this year's meeting will be held in Boston from May 27th to the 31st. There'll be more information on the website about where we're going to be visiting and the conference hotel and all that stuff. That'll be coming up in the next few weeks. Tonight, we have a really special treat. We have Russell Hooper, who lives in Spring Hill, Tennessee. I first got to know Russell when he reached out to me about a collection of Maury family papers that he had purchased at Swan Auctions, and unbeknownst to him and unbeknownst to me, but he was the one that outbid me on that collection, much to our chagrin. But I was glad that I went to a collector who cares about preserving history and manuscript collections so much. But Russell Hooper is a history enthusiast and collector, and he's been amassing the largest known collection of Fontaine-Maurys family papers over the last 15 years. He has called it the Pathfinder Papers, based on the most famous, probably, Maury is Matthew Fontaine-Maury, the Pathfinder of the Seas. He, in addition to living in Springfield, Tennessee, he has served on the boards of the Battle of Franklin Trust and the Maury County Historical Society. And in 2018, he received a research travel grant from William & Mary Libraries to do research in our Maury family papers. Tonight, he will be discussing his collecting journey, how he became interested in the Fontaine-Maury family, and his vision for telling a story drawn from the history preserved in the papers. In addition to Matthew Fontaine-Maury, the presentation will include information on Presidents James Madison and James Garfield, Admiral Samuel DuPont, Ellen Mordecai, James Gore King, John Cropper, William Gavaney, Philip Evans, who was son of Jupiter Evans, Thomas Jefferson's enslaved personal servant, and Anthony Faela. So without further ado, Russell, on to you. Let's hear about the Maury family papers you have in your possession.
Well, thanks for having me, Jay. I hope you can hear me all right. This is my first time.
Yeah, we can hear you fine.
All right, my first time doing something like this, but thank you so much for having me. And I remember that Swan auction well, but all's well that ends well, and I'm so grateful we connected in the long run. But since kind of limited with time tonight, got a lot to talk about, I'll dig in. And I'll start with how I first started down this path of exploring the Fontaine-Maury family. And that traces back to my friendship with Robert Hicks. And Robert was the New York Times best-selling author of The Widow of the South, which is historical fiction, but it was inspired by the Battle of Franklin, which took place here in Tennessee here, and Carrie McGavick and the McGavick family and Carnton, where they lived. But I first met Robert around 2008, and we became very good friends. And he rekindled my interest in history. And one of Robert's mentors was Shelby Foote. And so Robert encouraged me to read Shelby Foote's Civil War, a narrative, the 3,000 page opus. And I read it. It took me quite a while, but on several of the pages in that book, Shelby discussed the CSS Alabama, which was a British-built Confederate merchant raider, built in Liverpool, England, under a shroud of secrecy. Teddy Roosevelt's uncle, James Bullock, oversaw the building and the launch of the CSS Alabama. And that just fascinated me. And I'd never known anything about that or England's involvement under the table with the Confederacy. So I started to read more and more about the Alabama, including the memoirs of its captain, Admiral Raphael Semmes. And in Semmes' memoirs, he mentioned several times his friend Matthew Maury from Tennessee. And Semmes said that Maury was this great scientist who had discovered the pathways of the oceans, studied weather patterns, was just this amazing scientist, global scientist from Tennessee. And so since I was born and raised here and my family goes back here several generations, I decided to look into this Matthew Maury. And I found out that he was born in Virginia in 1806, but moved with his branch of the Maury family to Franklin, Tennessee, where I've spent a large portion of my life in 1811 when he was about 5 or 6 years old. So I had no idea Maury grew up here in Franklin. And I delved deeper into Maury's life and found that his grandfather was Reverend James Maury, who ran a school for boys in Albemarle County, Virginia, and that one of his most famous students was young Thomas Jefferson. And then I learned that Jefferson lived with Reverend Maury and his family for about 2 years while he attended the Maury School for Boys. So I just became fascinated with that. And when Robert and I would hang out a lot, there used to be a rare book and manuscript shop in Leapers Fork, Tennessee, near us, called Yeoman's in the Fork. And our friend Mike Cotter, and I know you know Mike too, Jay, Mike was the manager of Yeoman's in the Fork at that time. And it was in an old house. And for people that love old books and collecting and whatnot, whenever you would walk inside Yeoman's in the Fork, it was like walking into Willy Wonka's chocolate factory. There were rare books lining the shelves, documents on the walls, old letters displayed for sale. It was just a magical place and a magical time in my life. But Mike knew that I was interested in Maury. And one afternoon, Mike called me and he told me he'd been at a convention, rare book convention, I believe in the Washington, D.C. area. And one night he was at a restaurant having drinks with some of the other convention goers. And one of the gentlemen there asked Mike if he had any friends or clients that were interested in any particular historical figures. And Mike said, well, I have a friend in Franklin who's interested in this kind of obscure scientist. His name was Matthew Maury, pathfinder of the seas and father of oceanography. And the gentleman said, you're in luck because I know someone who has an extensive collection of Maury's papers. And that individual ended up being the late Mr. William Rees of William Rees and Company. And before I move on about that, I just want to point out the picture you're seeing. That's myself with Robert Hicks and Mike. That was in Franklin in 2016 at the launch of Robert's third book in his Franklin trilogy, The Orphan Mother. But without Robert or Mike, I don't think I'd be here tonight. They both set me on this path, and I'm very grateful for that. And Robert passed away almost 4 years ago, so miss him a lot, but I carry his spirit with me. But if we want to move on to the next slide. So Mike told me that Mr. William Rees had this extensive collection of Maury family papers centered around Commander Maury. And it was quite extensive. It was almost 500 letters. And I had never imagined anything like this in my life, that I would even consider acquiring something like this. As you can see here, this was a little piece that came with the collection. It's 121 autographed letters signed by Commander Maury, the father of modern oceanography. And it said that most of them were written to a cousin in New York who was unknown to biographers. And the letters were never seen or offered for sale before, and they revealed a new side to Maury. And also in the archive were an additional 350 letters from family and friends that have been held into in the Maury family until now. So I discussed this with Robert and Mike, and Robert told me if I felt called to purchase this, to do it. And so I did. I acquired the collection, and it was a big change in my life. But it was an exciting change. But I took possession of the collection at Yeoman's in the Fork, the rare book shop, and it was stacks of binders filled with letters. And Mike handled all he brokered the deal and handled all of that aspect of it. But I soon got to work transcribing these 500 some odd letters, and I transcribed by hand into spiral notebooks, and then I would type them up. And I transcribed by hand because I felt that it brought me closer in some ways to the people who had written the letters. So it was a long process. That process took probably over 2 years. But one of the people I got to know while doing that was the cousin in New York, who was previously unknown to biographers. And if we'll change slides, I'd like to introduce you to that cousin in New York. And his name was also Matthew Maury. And in some of the letters I have, he's referred to as Cousin Matt. And so that's how I refer to him. But what you're seeing there is a portrait of Cousin Matt. This portrait was painted several years after his death. He died in 1877 in New York. This portrait was painted in 1885 for the New York Chamber of Commerce. It was painted by Julian Scott, who was a Civil War Medal of Honor recipient. And after the Civil War, Julian Scott became a renowned painter and artist. So he painted Cousin Matt's portrait for the New York Chamber of Commerce. And in the days following Cousin Matt's death in New York, the New York Times ran several days worth of articles of tributes to him, obituaries. And he was quite a remarkable individual and very close to his first cousin, Commander Matthew Maury. But in order to introduce you to Cousin Matt, I'm going to read a little bit from one of his obituaries. I think it'll give you a fairly good idea of who he was with the short amount of time that we have. September 19th, 1877, New York Times. The death was announced yesterday of one of New York's well-known merchants, Mr. Matthew Maury, for nearly 50 years identified with the cotton interests of this city, succumbed to old age and general debility at an early hour yesterday morning in his 77th year. The deceased merchant was descended from the well-known Virginia Maury family. His father, James Maury, was the first consul appointed by George Washington after the latter's inauguration as first president of the Republic. Consul Maury represented the United States in Liverpool. In that city, Matthew Maury was born. Young Maury received a thorough education at Eton and Cambridge, where he had as a classmate the distinguished ex-Prime Minister of England, William Gladstone. After attaining his majority, he entered into the cotton business with his father in his native city of Liverpool. He came to this country in 1832 with his brother Rutson, and together they established the firm of M&R Maury, afterward changed to Maury Brothers. Commander Matthew Maury, United States Navy, the great authority on naval matters, was his cousin. And so that gives a little insight into who this cousin Matt Maury was in New York. He eventually married Elizabeth Gilpin. She came from the Gilpin family. And they settled at a home at 62 Irving Place near 18th Street. And that was in the Gramercy Park area of Manhattan. And that's where they lived, kind of near where Pete's Tavern is today, from what I can gather. And Pete's Tavern opened in the 1860s, and I think it's still open today. But if we'll move to the next slide. As I mentioned, cousin Matt Maury and Commander Maury were very close. They shared a lot of similar interests. Cousin Matt loved astronomy. He loved all things dealing with the ocean and travel and steamships and weather. He tried to get a weather observatory placed on the Battery in New York at one point in his life. But most of the letters that Commander Maury wrote to his cousin Matt in New York, Commander Maury wrote from the first U.S. Naval Observatory in Washington, D.C., where Commander Maury served as first superintendent for about 16 years. And what you're seeing on your screen, that's a historic marker that's at the old original U.S. Naval Observatory. And Commander Maury and his family lived in the observatory. But the letter you're seeing is a letter that Matthew Maury wrote to Cousin Matt in December of 1847. And it's Commander Maury in his element. He is charting out sailing routes for steamships. In this case, Chagres, Panama, the Chagres River in Panama, and to Shanghai, China. And he would often write these letters to Cousin Matt, and they would bounce ideas off of each other. But in this letter, an excerpt from it, Commander Maury writes, from the English Channel, I make Chagres about 4,300 miles, or 20 days steaming, which by this route would make the passage from Liverpool to the far port of China to be about 60 days, fast sailing and no delays. So a lot of their letters pertain to that type of discussion. But if you want to move to the next slide. This is another letter, and I'm glad Jay and I decided to add this one over the weekend. This is a letter that Cousin Matt Maury in New York wrote to his cousin Reuben Maury in Virginia, and it shows the bond between the Fontaine-Maurys family. Reuben Maury owned the Piedmont Plantation, which I believe is now part of UVA grounds. And Cousin Matt wrote this letter to his cousin Reuben on April 29th, 1857. And I'd like to read an excerpt from it. Cousin Matt wrote, I don't hear anything from you as to that visit which I have urged you and your wife to make to New York one of these days. Tell her it would do her good and you too, and that even if Anne's house is full, we have plenty of room for you at number 62 Irving Place near 18th Street. If you were to revisit New York, you would scarcely know it by what it was when you were here before. So much increased, so many new and beautiful buildings, the great ocean steamers, and 1,000 things. You had better come and look. So that's a fascinating letter just showing the bond between the northern Fontaine-Maurys family and their southern cousins. And if you want to go to the next slide, this gentleman here was one of Cousin Matt's primary friends in New York, as well as the entire Fontaine-Maurys family in New York. And he was also close with Commander Maury, too. This is Mr. James Gore King, and he was known as the Almighty of Wall Street. He came from a very powerful family. His father was Rufus King, but he and his wife, Sarah Gracie King, they lived in Weehawken, New Jersey, across the Hudson River from Manhattan, and their estate was known as Highwood. And Highwood the Kings hosted a lot of very well-known people at Highwood through the years. Washington Irving, author of Legend of Sleepy Hollow, was a regular guest at Highwood. I have a letter that Cousin Matt's brother Rutson wrote detailing meeting Washington Irving one day at Highwood. Charles Dickens, when he visited America, he stayed with the Kings at Highwood. So the Kings were a very influential family. James Gore King's wife, Sarah Gracie King, her father was Archibald Gracie, a well-known New York businessman. And the Gracies lived at Gracie Mansion. And sort of a thread into modern times, today, Gracie Mansion in New York is the official residence of the mayor of New York City. So kind of a neat thread to modern times. But in this letter by James Gore King in my collection, he's writing Cousin Matt in August of 1832. And Cousin Matt's father, Consul James Maury, has recently returned to America from Liverpool, where he served almost 40 years as U.S. consul there. And Consul Maury is looking for a permanent residence in New York. And James Gore King is offering him a place to stay at Highwood while he does that. And James Gore King wrote to Cousin Matt, please say to him we are all well at Highwood, and where we shall be glad to receive and keep him and Anne if they will come to us. So just a neat little insight into some of the Maurys' good friends in New York City. And if we'll go to the next slide. Now this letter here, this is one of the more powerful letters in the collection. I'll never forget first transcribing this letter. This was written by Cousin Matt's sister, Anne Maury. And if any members of the Fontaine-Maurys Society are here tonight, they will know Anne well. She was the editor of Memoirs of a Huguenot Family. But this letter was written from James and Dolly Madison's Montpelier on August 6th, 1835. And as I was transcribing this letter, it began to dawn on me what it was about. And what it was about was it chronicled what would be the final visit of Consul James Maury with President James Madison. President Madison would pass away a few months after this letter was written. But I'll read a little bit of what Anne wrote in this letter. August 6, 1835, we find Mr. Madison a good deal changed. His voice is weaker, apparently, from some little difficulty in breathing, and he has become rather deaf. And Papa being deaf also, their conversation is less interesting to themselves than it used to be. Yet still they seem to be much pleased in meeting. Mr. Madison's mind is perfect and his memory unimpaired, but his poor frail body is a complete wreck. So that letter provides some nice insight into President Madison's condition as he was entering the last part of his life. And after I finished transcribing this letter, I reached out to Montpelier that afternoon. I called them and left a message. And I had no idea if I would hear back from them, but I did within about an hour. And her name was Tiffany Cole. And Tiffany's no longer with Montpelier. The last I corresponded with Tiffany, she's at James Madison University in their special collections. But Tiffany explained to me that she knew exactly what I was talking about because they had letters written between Dolly Madison and Anne Maury before the visit, and they had letters written between the two after the visit. But this was the first letter they had ever come across that was written during the final visit between Consul Maury and James Madison. And my wife and I eventually went up to Montpelier and met with Tiffany. We also met with Dr. David Mattern, who at that time was the editor of James Madison's papers at the University of Virginia. And I brought the letter and they scanned it. I gave them my transcription, and it was a really, really special event. So I treasure that memory. But if we'll move to the next slide. Now, this is from the same letter. And obviously that's one word, Phil. Just one little scratch of ink on that paper. And for many years, I had no idea who Phil was. But about 2 or 3 years ago, the Fontaine-Maurys Society donated a 250-year-old Bible that had passed down through Consul Maury to one of his sons. They donated it to Thomas Jefferson's Monticello as a symbol of the friendship between the Maurys and Thomas Jefferson. And during that time, I met with a couple of wonderful people at the International Center for Jefferson Studies, Dr. Megan Brett and Dr. Andrew Davenport. And they explained to me that it was Philip Evans, and he was the son of Jupiter Evans, who was Thomas Jefferson's personal enslaved servant. And I want to read a little excerpt from Anne Maury's letter, from the same letter from Montpelier. And she wrote, "As we do not intend to go to Charlottesville, we thought it but right to allow Phil, when so near home, to make a visit to his family. And he is gone this morning in great state in the hack in which we traveled. Finding that we intended to keep it until we returned to Fredericksburg, he asked permission to have the use of it, and we granted it." So as I discovered, Phil went to New York with the Maurys. And I'm going to quote a little bit from Lucia Stanton's book, Free Someday, The African American Families of Monticello, which was published in 2000 by the Thomas Jefferson Foundation. And she wrote, while Jupiter Evans was still a slave at his death, his son Philip Evans died in nominal, if not legal freedom in New York City. When James Maury, former American consul in Liverpool, returned with his family to Virginia in 1831, Thomas Jefferson Randolph offered Phil Evans' services to the Maurys in their travels. 2 years later, he asked for the return of my man Phil. Subsequently, as Randolph recollected, Philip Evans hired himself from me at a nominal hire and lived the rest of his life in New York City, where he had settled in the employ of the Maurys. And so, as I continue on my work with the Pathfinder papers, one of my goals is to find out what became of Phil in New York. I only have one more mention of Phil in the entire collection, and that came from Ellen Mordecai. She came from the Mordecai family, which was a Jewish family in the North Carolina, Virginia area. And she was a governess, and she worked for some of the families in New York that the Maurys were friends with, Denning Dewar, the Dewar family. But Ellen wrote on November 26, 1841 to Anne, "Thank you for telling me Phil has a good place." So that's the last clue I have about where Phil is, and hopefully be able to find out more about his life in New York. But if we move to the next slide, we'll enter into the period of the Civil War. And for the Fontaine-Maurys family, the Civil War was a very painful time, as it was for many families. The Fontaine-Maurys family was ripped apart in some ways, as many were. Some of the family sided with the Confederacy, and some remained loyal to the United States. Commander Maury, of course, is well known. Commander Maury sided with the Confederacy. And Maury spent most of the time during the war abroad, largely in England and France. He moved between London and Paris. He was close with Napoleon III, so he spent some time in Paris, pressing the Confederate cause to those countries. But over here in the U.S., cousin Matt Maury, his sister Anne, and Rudson Maury remained loyal to the United States. And cousin Matt in New York worked tirelessly behind the scenes to thwart the Confederate efforts, especially abroad. And I'm sure it was very strange for cousin Matt because Liverpool, where he grew up, was sort of a hotbed for Confederate activity. It was sort of the Confederacy's overseas headquarters. But this is a letter. One of the people that cousin Matt corresponded with during the war was his friend, Admiral Samuel DuPont. And Admiral DuPont was the commander of the U.S. South Atlantic Blockading Squadron at Port Royal, South Carolina. And I'd like to read an excerpt from this letter that cousin Matt wrote to Admiral DuPont. November 18th, 1862. Dear Sir, I wrote to you lately with an authentic report of the proceedings of the New York Chamber of Commerce as to the CSS Alabama. I see a letter today of 7th from New Orleans from a party who has been very lately traveling between Mobile and Richmond. He says that the Oreto is preparing in Mobile for a career similar to the Alabama. And it seems M.F. Maury went over to England partly to attend to the Confederate vessels building there, also confidential between us. So as you can tell from this letter, cousin Matt, the intelligence that he received was top line during the war. And the Oreto, which he mentioned to Admiral DuPont, that was eventually became the CSS Florida, another Confederate merchant raider. I believe it was built in Britain as well. And Commander Maury acquired the CSS Georgia for the Confederacy. He acquired that in Scotland. But that's a neat letter to DuPont showing cousin Matt's involvement behind the scenes during the war. And if you want to go to the next slide, this is another very important friend of cousin Matt Maury's of New York. This is one of his friends from his days growing up in Liverpool. This is Mr. John Cropper. And John Cropper was known as the most generous man in Liverpool. And he was also a world-renowned abolitionist. In fact, when Harriet Beecher Stowe visited Liverpool in 1853 to tour her book, Uncle Tom's Cabin, she stayed with John Cropper and his family at their Liverpool estate, which was called Dingle Bank. It was along the cast iron shore, which some Liverpudlians call the Kazi. The Beatles sang about the cast iron shore in Glass Onion, the song Glass Onion. But John Cropper was a very, very powerful man, and I've enjoyed getting to know him through these letters. And in this letter, John Cropper wrote to Cousin Matt on January 9th, 1865, I cannot help hoping that the recent serious reverses of the South may lead to some seeing for peace. They must give up their darling idle slavery, or it will give them up. Hood's defeat, if not dispersion, and Sherman's wonderful march must surely open some eyes. So that's a very powerful letter, and that hits me especially here because when he says Hood's defeat, he's referring to General John Bell Hood in the Tennessee campaign, the battles of Spring Hill, the battles of Franklin and Nashville, which took place right here where I live. And just to think that those battles sent shockwaves around the world, even to one of the world's most renowned abolitionists. And I will note that during the war, Cousin Matt actually traveled to Liverpool to spend time with John Cropper. Now, if we'll go to the next slide. Now we'll go to after the war. And I thought this would be a neat a letter to touch upon, given that Netflix has that show out now called Death by Lightning. I think Michael Shannon portrays James Garfield in it. It's about James Garfield and his assassination. But Cousin Matt, after the war, one of his main pursuits was to get the financial situation of our country back in order. And during the war, we basically came off the gold standard and we printed unbacked fiat paper currency called greenbacks. And Cousin Matt wanted us to get off that and to get back on a gold standard quickly. And one of the people he communicated with was future President James Garfield. And in 1876, Garfield wrote an article for The Atlantic called The Currency Conflict. You can see a small picture of that up there on your screen. But I'll read a little bit from Cousin Matt's New York Chamber of Commerce biography about his views of getting back on the gold standard. The resumption of specie payments Matthew Maury urged almost from the day the Civil War ended. Maury was one of the very few who insisted that preparation should begin at once to retire the greenbacks and bring the country back to a gold basis, believing that this would check speculation, which he argued would be the inevitable result of our unredeemable and inflated currency. So, and if you'll move to the next slide, you can actually see Cousin Matt's letter to James Garfield, which he wrote March 11th, 1876. And in this letter, Matthew Maury wrote to James Garfield, Dear Sir, I have your favor of the 4th before me, and now send the pamphlet about bimetallic currency. Your paper in the Atlantic Monthly gave me much pleasure. And if you have an account with the Atlantic, you can actually read James Garfield's article that Cousin Matt is referring. It's actually fascinating. But if you'll move on to the next slide. At this point, I'll talk a little bit about another acquisition that I made for the Pathfinder papers several years ago. And I guess it was probably about 7 years ago, Mr. Brian Nilsson, he's the research librarian for the Fontaine-Maurys Society. He reached out to me to let me know that there was a British historian that had over 120 original Maury family letters that she was looking for to find a new home for them. And so he connected me with her, and her name was Renata Ely Long. And Renata wrote the book In the Shadow of the Alabama, which is a fantastic book that looks behind the scenes of the spy game that went on around the building and launch of the CSS Alabama. And of course, Commander Maury was involved with that in some way. So she was familiar with Maury. And she told me the story of how those letters came to her in England. Her late husband was on a business trip in Sarasota, Florida. And he was in an antique shop when he noticed a box full of letters, and on the box it said Maury family papers. And so he knew his wife was working on this book, and he knew that Commander Maury played a role in it. So he bought the collection thinking it might have information about Commander Maury in it. So they brought the letters back to England, and Renata went through them, and she very quickly found out they did not pertain to Commander Maury. Instead, they pertained to the early Franklin, Tennessee Maury family papers, or family. And Abram Maury was actually Commander Maury's cousin who founded Franklin, Tennessee in 1799. But these letters mostly dealt with Abram Maury's children. There's also a fantastic series of letters written by the first Episcopal Bishop of Tennessee, Bishop James Hervey Odie, as well as the second Episcopal Bishop of Tennessee, Charles Todd Quintard. And the bishops wrote those letters to members of the Maury family discussing the founding of Sewanee, the University of the South. But since they didn't have any, Renata didn't really have any need for them in her research, we worked out a win-win situation, and I acquired those letters from her. And the package that you see in the picture there, that was when they arrived from England, back on Tennessee time. So that was a unique experience for both of us. And FedEx did a wonderful job. But I also investigated where those letters passed down through the Maury family. And they passed down through one of Abram Maury's three-time great-granddaughters. And I found out that she's fascinating. And Jay, we were talking about her before we went live. And I'm going to try to pronounce her name as best as I can. Mary Maury Fiala Lazarovich Herebleniovich. I call her Princess Mary for short. But she died in Florida in 2012 at the age of 102. And I'll read just an excerpt from one of her obituaries. Mary, a New Yorker by birth, was the daughter of Mary Claire Pereire and Anthony Fiala, and was born June 23, 1910. Her father was the commander of the Fiala-Ziegler Polar Expedition of 1903-1905, which was stranded in the Arctic for 2 years before being rescued. In 1943, Mary went to USNR Midshipmen's School, becoming a wave, and served in the Navy until 1954. Upon retirement, she was given the grade of commander. In June 1955, Mary married Prince Dusan Lazarovich Herebleniovich of Old Serbia. Their residence was in New York City. While married, she was a librarian in the New York library system. But she is buried in Arlington National Cemetery with her mother and father and two of her siblings, including her brother, Rear Admiral Reed Pereire Fiala. But I want to learn more about Princess Mary. And as I said, Jay, she went to William and Mary. But the picture you see beside the box there, that's Princess Mary's father. That's Anthony Fiala. And that's an original 1926 press photo that I acquired. I've been lately adding some of Anthony's papers to the collection. And he is National Geographic's first explorer cinematographer. He took the first motion picture footage in the Arctic, ever taken in the Arctic. And I believe he shot that footage in around 1902. So a fascinating character. And if you'll pass to the next slide real quick. Another acquisition I made about 3 years ago, my friend Scott Smith here in Tennessee, Franklin, Tennessee. Jay, you know Scott too. Scott called me one night and said he was working at an estate sale and that they had found a box of Maury family papers in the garage. And it was an appointment-only estate sale, so I made an appointment and I went out there, and I'm glad I did. And while I was there, I know we're running out of time. I'll speed up a little bit, but I found a box of about 30 letters with Washington Territory written on them. And that piqued my interest because when I was younger, back in high school, I spent a year at a school in northern Idaho. So I love that area of our country, the Pacific Northwest. It has a very unique spirit about it. And come to find out, those letters were written by Judge Frank T. Reed who was one of Abram Maurys' great-grandchildren. And Frank was born here in Franklin. When he was 16, the Civil War broke loose, and he joined the Confederacy at 16. And the war ended. He was 19 years old. He became a circuit court judge in Nashville after the war. And in 1884, Frank ran for governor of Tennessee, but he ran as the Republican nominee, the party of Abraham Lincoln. And to my knowledge, he's the only Confederate veteran in Tennessee history to run for the Republican nominee in a governor's race. And he ran against another Confederate veteran, the incumbent, General William Bate. And I believe it was the first time in Tennessee's history that two Confederate veterans had run against each other. Now, Frank lost the election by a very small amount, but he did lose. And by 1889, Frank had decided he wanted to leave Tennessee. I think he had wanted Tennessee to go one direction, and it was going another direction, he felt. And so he wanted to start his family in a new place. So he headed to the Pacific Northwest in August of 1889, got on the Northern Pacific, and arrived in Tacoma, the city of destiny. And in Washington State, Frank became a Superior Court judge in Snohomish County. He became a vegetarian, a theosophist. He tried to start a vegetarian colony in Kingston, Washington, where he lived. Just an amazing man. And running out of time, but I want to mention one of his friends, William H. Galvani. And that's a picture of Galvani there beside Frank. William H. Galvani was one of Frank's friends in the Washington area. Galvani was born in Russia, came to America. He was a civil engineer. He was Jewish, but he was fascinated by Buddhism. So he wrote at length about Buddhism. He was at one time president of the Oregon Vegetarian Society. Just a remarkable man. But one thing I wanted to mention about William Galvani is he was one of us. He was a collector, and Galvani collected rare maps. And he built a relationship over his lifetime with Oregon State University. And when he died, he left his map collection to Oregon State. So today, the Oregon State University is the home of the William H. Galvani Rare Map Collection. And if we'll go to the next slide, that's Galvani's signature on a little autograph book that belonged to one of Frank Reed's daughters. And you can see he signed it in Tacoma, March of 1891. And I want to mention this feather real quick because I found it in one of Frank's letters. He had been in the Washington Territory for about a week when he wrote this letter to his wife, Josie, who was back in Franklin with their children. She hadn't moved out yet. But one of his friends took him to the Black Hills outside Olympia, and he met with this kind of mountain man who had built this cabin out there. And Frank was kind of searching for the meaning of life, and he wrote this letter about that meeting. He said, our talk was about God, the soul, the human spirit, the sign of the times. The man said many things. One was that he thanked God that Jesus never got a pin between his fingers. He loves Jesus but despises the church. I have only time to say that I found in that wild mountain valley on the Pacific coast a human soul alive, and I thanked God for the sight and for being brought into contact with such. Wonders never cease. P.S. I send feathers from the grouse we killed today. And that letter, I found it in the letter. That's a 137-year-old grouse feather. So just boggles my mind. Wonders never cease indeed. But now I'll start to wind up a little bit. If you go to the next slide. And Jay, I want to end with something that we talked about last week when I was preparing for this, and an area that interests me going forward with the Pathfinder papers. And Commander Maurys' influence on literary works during his time is pretty well known. Jules Verne, for example, when he wrote 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea, Jules Verne was just really taken with Matthew Maurys' scientific studies of the ocean. And Jules Verne actually mentioned Maury by name several times in 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea, even though it was a work of fiction. But one area that I really want to look into as I continue on is the the influence of Matthew Maury, Commander Maury, on Herman Melville. And Herman Melville wrote in his journal that Maury's well charts had a direct influence on the Captain Ahab's well charts in Moby Dick. But I think it also goes a little deeper. I think when Herman Melville mentions the poor poet from Tennessee in the opening pages of Moby Dick, that I think he's alluding to Matthew Maury, who grew up in Franklin, Tennessee. And I have a lot of reasons why I think that, and I'm running out of time. But what you see on your screen there is an 1829 Department of State Navy register. And you can see that young Matthew Maury and Thomas Melville served together on the USS Vincennes, which was the first U.S. warship that circumnavigated the globe. And Thomas Melville was Herman Melville's cousin, and Thomas and Herman were very close. And I suspect that this is when Herman Melville first heard about Matthew Maury. But if we'll go to the next slide there. And this is an article that was published in Sea History magazine in 2016. And it was written by my good friend, John Grady. John was a former editor of the Navy Times. He studied Commander Maury for over 40 years. And in 2015, John published a comprehensive biography of Commander Maury, which in my opinion is the best ever written about Maury. It's an honest look at Maury's very complex life and career. But John passed away about 2 months ago. And I sure am going to miss him because he was a really good friend and mentor to me and always supported my efforts. But for this article, I opened up the Pathfinder papers to John a little bit, and he actually included an excerpt from one of Cousin Matt Maury's letters in this article. But in this article, John wrote the following. How did Maury, who grew up far from the coast in Franklin, Tennessee, end up as the driving force behind American naval exploration? Maury and Jeremiah Reynolds became friends as their interests were far-ranging and similar. The need for a great American naval scientific expedition and the recognition of whaling's centrality to economic well-being. Maury, an inveterate note-keeper, shared his observations on whales in the unknown West. In turn, Reynolds passed along his own tale of a great white whale he had seen in the Pacific that he called Mocha Dick. And if you'll change the slide. That is actually the cover of Jeremiah Reynolds' book, Mocha Dick, or the White Whale of the Pacific. And if you go to the last slide there, that's a picture of John Grady and myself in Franklin, Tennessee, back in 2018, August of 2018. And John and his wife Lillian had come here to Franklin to see where Commander Maury grew up. And it was a very special day. We spent the whole day riding around Franklin, and I was showing John the different places where Maury used to roam when he was a boy here growing up in Tennessee. But as I wind up, I'll say as I move forward with trying to compose a story inspired by the history held in these Pathfinder papers, I plan on carrying John's spirit with me and Robert Hicks' spirit with me, and as I move forward with that. And I'll wrap up now, and I really thank you, Jay, and the Manuscript Society for having me speak tonight, and I hope you all have enjoyed the talk.
Thanks, Russell. That was wonderful. I know we had talked many times about the Pathfinder papers, but I've learned so much more, so thank you. Two things I want to mention before we get into questions is the Richard Mass grant is open. The deadline is February 14th, so check online for information about that. And the other thing is I want to make, if you haven't read Robert Hicks' book, the trilogy on Battle of Franklin, like the, what was it, The Orphan?
The Orphan, yes, The Orphan Mother. And I will say there is a character in The Orphan Mother called Hooper. And Robert put the character Hooper in The Orphan Mother as a tribute to our friendship. And so I'll always cherish that. But
in the Battle of Franklin, if you're interested in battlefields in the Civil War, Battle of Franklin area is very well preserved, and it's not run by the Park Service, and it's amazing. But Those books of historical fiction are great, but let's get into the questions. If you have any questions, put them in the Q&A there. One question the first question I have for you, Russell, is who do you consider the most interesting and fascinating person in your Fontaine-Maury family papers?
Oh goodness, that's a great question. There's so many. Part of the fun of this going down this path is every time I think I've run out of a fascinating character in this family, one shows up, just like Anthony Fiala. I mean, National Geographic's first explorer cinematographer. I mean, what in the world? Judge Frank Reed is absolutely fascinating. I wrote a 30-page article about Judge Reed and his life in the Williamson County Historical Society Journal. And Frank Reed is up there. Judge Frank Reed is up there. And I've become friends with Richard Heisler in Seattle. He runs Civil War Seattle, and he is just as fascinated by Frank Reed. It's amazing how many Civil War veterans ended up in the Pacific Northwest. One of Frank Reed's friends up there was William Prosser. Prosser was from Williamsport, Pennsylvania, but after the Civil War, Prosser ended up in Nashville during Reconstruction. But Prosser ended up going out to Washington State as well, and Prosser, Washington is named in his honor. But I would say Frank Reed is up there as one of the most interesting.
Are you still adding to this collection? Are you still acquiring materials?
I am. When I see something, Anthony Fiala is really interesting to me right now, so I'm adding to him, and I really want to find out more about Princess Mary. And she's buried at Arlington, and her tombstone reads, commander in the Navy, and I believe World War II, Korea, and I believe Vietnam. And at the bottom of her tombstone in Arlington, it says it's got princess engraved into it. So it's like a Princess Leia in real life. She seemed like she was a fascinating lady.
Does anybody else, any questions from the attendees? I've got another couple, Russell.
Okay.
You mentioned Matthew Fontaine-Maury's connection to the Confederate Secret Service and doing anything. There you think about two areas in these group of papers. Is there a lot of information about the Confederate Secret Service in these papers?
I did make an acquisition a while back that I wasn't able to talk about, and it's a 250-page journal, which was kept by Commander Maury's young cousin, Dabney Minor Scales. And Dabney was from Holly Springs, Mississippi. And Dabney, he ended up serving aboard the CSS Shenandoah. And I bought that during an auction, that 250-page journal. And it chronicles Dabney's time in Paris, France, leading up to when he joined the CSS Shenandoah. And the reason I went for that one hard was because I was wanting information on Commander Maury's movements in Paris, and I got some information from it. Dabney met with Maury in Paris. With William Corcoran was there, the Corcoran Art Gallery, Corcoran and Riggs Bank. That's a fascinating journal that gives some insight into that this kind of the spiring that was going on behind the scene. That journal, and I think that journal's publishable on its own. Dabney Minor Scales was a tremendous writer. He ended up teaching Romance languages at Ole Miss after the war, and then later in life fought in the Spanish-American War for the U.S. So he's an interesting person in the collection too.
And another question is about cousin Matt Maury.
Yes.
Even though he was a strong proponent or a strong supporter of the Union, he did benefit from cotton speculation during the war. Is that correct?
He did. And I can tell through his letters as the war progressed, he became more and more in support of John Cropper and the movement of the abolitionists. I could tell that it was moving him. But yes, he did benefit from cotton, and that's one of the ironic things, I guess you would say, about it. But yes, he did benefit from that cotton, and they were tremendously powerful in the cotton business. his son, James Fontaine-Maurys, ended up being the treasurer of the New York Cotton Exchange in the 1920s with Temple Gwathmey. And Gwathmey and Company, which started, and I have letters from the Gwathmey family. Gwathmey and Company carries on today as Merrill Lynch. So they were very powerful in the cotton business.
We still have a few more minutes, so if anybody has any questions, jump in. But explain to the group William Seward's involvement with the Maurys during the Civil War. I thought that was a fascinating story.
Oh, yeah, I didn't even have time to get to that. During the war, two of Cousin Matt's nephews, Rutson, and the other one was named Matthew Fontaine-Maurys, but he went by Fontaine-Maurys. Fontaine and Rutson Maurys, their young nephews, were arrested under direct order from William Seward, and I have a lot of those papers too. The two young lads had in their carpet bags. They used to travel from New Orleans across the lines, and they had secret compartments in their carpet bags where they were secretly carrying letters across Confederate and U.S. lines. And Seward had them arrested. Fontaine went to Fort Warren Prison in Boston, and it was a big deal. Seward had Maury brothers raided. They took all Maury brothers' letters and papers, and Cousin Matt and William Seward, they hashed it out. And actually, he and Seward made their peace. Cousin Matt was not involved in any way, obviously. And after the war, Cousin Matt and William Seward worked together on the cotton tax issue. But yeah, it got pretty tense there because Seward was also close to Commander Matthew Maurys. So I think Seward kind of felt that Cousin Matt was automatically in cahoots with Commander Maurys, which he was not, that I know of.
Well, thank you very much, Russell. Here's a question right here. One question from Brian Nilsson. Could you ask Russell to briefly mention how the Maurys connect to the Fontaines? It's something that listeners aren't aware of.
Oh, yes. And I'm not as familiar as Brian is, but I guess it was Commander Maurys' great grandparents, if I've got the genealogy correct, Matthew Maurys, and I think it's Marianne Fontaine. They married. The two families married into each other. They were French Huguenots, and they ended up, as I understand it, in Dublin. And Brian knows much more about that aspect than I do, but I believe it was Marianne. I don't have my notes in front of me. Marianne Fontaine and Matthew Maurys, and I believe those were Commander Maurys' great grandparents, I think.
And the Fontaine-Maurys Society, Family Society, they meet every year. Is that correct?
They
Very
do.
active family group.
They are, and I'm not a member of the family, but it's open. Membership's open to anyone, and they're wonderful people, and it's a wonderful organization, and they've helped me tremendously. And part of the reason I love doing what I do so much is because I know so many of the people in this family, and they're just really a wonderful, wonderful group of people.
Great. Last chance. Anybody have any other questions? Yeah, James. Yeah, James Maurys. Parents are Matthew Maurys and Marianne Fontaine. So, well, that seems to be about it, Russell. Thank you very much for a wonderful presentation and sharing the history of the Fontaine-Maurys family and also the papers. Just it's amazing the long connection of the family and the papers. It's not just about the Civil War. It's not just about early Virginia or Liverpool, but it really runs the gamut and covers so much important history. And it's why I love manuscripts and letters so much, because it really can really get the information that that it's almost the secret information that families will share amongst each other. So,
Right.
and it's wonderful that the stuff has been saved over all these years, and that you're doing so much to do that.
Well, thank you, Jay. I was honored to be here tonight.
Great. Well, stay tuned. Keep an eye on the Manuscript Society website for our February Manuscript Monday, and keep an eye on the future ones all year. They've got their work to cut out for them to keep up with Russell's great presentation. And Russell, thank you very much for your time, and thank you for the attendees, and have a great evening, everybody. Bye bye.
Thanks, Jay.